Okay, so I think we're recording now. So Father Rocco, again, what an honor to be here to interview you today, to have this conversation. And then my first question is, if you could describe your childhood, your family, and where you grew up before you came to St. Peter. So what was your life like before you started like higher education, Jesuit higher education?
So thanks, Des. Well, I grew up in South Jersey, close to Camden. My mom and dad were originally from Philadelphia. And when they married in 1954, they bought a little house over the Walt Whitman Bridge in South Jersey. And they would make that their home for over 59 years. And that was the kind of space I grew up in. But I was always
When was your birthday? When's your birthday?
my birthday. I was born in 1961, July 27th. So my big 60th is coming.
Oh, congratulations.
Or
Congrats.
condolences.
Oh. Oh no. Okay, so 1961. Mm-hmm.
But I guess, why I would fall in love with a place like St. Peter's and Jersey City. I always grew up hearing about life in a more urban space. My mom and dad grew up in these very ethnic, cultural neighborhoods in Philadelphia. My mother in a German working class neighborhood, my dad in a very Italian neighborhood. And so I was always fascinated by city, urban, but I grew up in suburbia. Grew up in a very Catholic home. My dad was very involved in our church. I would go to Catholic grade school, public high school. And then for college, I really wanted to get back to like Catholic education. I miss not being able to talk about God, the divine. Public school, you just couldn't go there. So I ended up going to St. Joe's University in Philadelphia. I also wanted to be in the city, so I went over to Philadelphia. And I would meet Jesuits for the first time, as teachers, as deans, as chaplains. And I thought it was really cool that you could be a priest and like they were priests and professors and deans and medical doctors and lawyers. And I thought that was really interesting. I was first generation to go to college of my extended family of cousins and aunts and uncles. And so I realized I was given this opportunity, and I was very grateful. And I've always been comfortable, very comfortable at St. Peter's because of that mission of ours to welcome first generation young women and men and others to experience something, a community of care and concern and action, service. But I was a history major and a theology minor, and I would graduate in 1984, and I started teaching, and I would teach for 5 years in Catholic schools. And it was during that time, and I think I always say it was my students asking me all these questions, that I began to look deep to decide and discern what would be my ultimate future. How could I best serve? And 1989, I entered the Jesuits. It was the same year, the same fall, 1989, when the 6 Jesuits of El Salvador, of the UCA, and the 2 women that worked at in the Jesuit community were assassinated. And that really informed my early Jesuit journey, that I wanted, like yourself and so many of our students, I wanted to enter into, social justice, something really wrong happened there. People were assassinated because they were speaking out against injustice, and they were speaking for the poor, and they were
Mhm.
working with the poor and the suffering.
Oh,
And
if I can stop you
sure,
right there, I have a bunch of questions because um,
I put a lot of
this is,
stuff out
yeah,
there.
yes, you did, but it's all okay. Um, One of my very first questions was, you grew up in the 60s, you grew up in a pretty religious household. Um, and you said so yourself that you were always very devout to Catholicism, and it was difficult for you to do that when you were still in elementary, middle school, high school, right? When you were still going to public school. Um, why was it difficult? Because at the time were folks just not as religious anymore, like the the trends, like the like movement towards a more scientific worldview instead of a religious one? Or was it just like um no, folks were religious, but you just took it a lot more seriously from a much younger age?
I think the times were changing. Like there's a
Mhm.
lot happening. You mentioned like 60s and 70s. There were changes in the Catholic Church, but there were also changes in society. Um, Not least of all, civil rights, assassinations of a president, and great leaders,
Mhm.
great voices for the suffering. And so and then Vietnam, I remember watching a lot of those
Mhm.
scenes of war and sadness. So I guess I was growing up in this very changing time, although my own family tried to maintain that devoutness and religion. Our society was asking a lot of questions, good questions, and we were being very challenged. For me, my faith was always a place I could go to find solace and
Mhm.
try to find some answers, or talk to God. But obviously, people were trying to figure out where they could go, and so I think you're right. I mean, it was like I would say like almost like a secularization. Um, Not everyone would subscribe to religion or church. I think so many of the young people I got to work with at St. Peter's over the years, they often would say, "Well, Father, I'm spiritual, but I don't know if I'm really into this organized religion thing, like to
Mhm.
be in this church or this synagogue or this house of worship. But I do feel spiritual. I feel there is something else, something more, something divine." Um, and I guess that was beginning when I was young too. I think that's been an evolution of lots of different thoughts, new
Mhm.
possibilities. Um, but for me, I guess it would always be, and still is, a bit of an anchor or a refuge, um, a place of inspiration or a source of inspiration. Um, Along with history. Behind me is like one of my favorite presidents, Franklin Roosevelt.
Yeah, I noticed.
And yeah, I don't know why, but I think he was kind of cool. He wasn't perfect, and wasn't always great. Wasn't great to his wife, but as a leader, um, he
Mhm.
was pretty amazing. And so trying to find the best and the worst and all the rest.
No, of course, of course. Um, okay, step by step. You mentioned that you grew up in a time where people were radicalizing and very quickly. And yes, there was, as you said, this secularization of specifically young people, and that was really propelled by this sort of anti-institution perspective, right? Because institution led to Vietnam. And
Yeah.
so anything that falls under that kind of umbrella is dangerous, is harmful. And I'm assuming folks associated that with the Catholic Church. And also that was it was a growing time for queer individuals, right? To because we had that queer liberation movement also going on in the 70s. We had Stonewall and in the late 60s. And again, because of this, view on the Catholic Church as an institution that was perpetuating this sort of, at the time, you may correct me, you may come in, you grew up as a young person during this time. What many say is a very homophobic agenda, right? So I have seen that. And I'm wondering, and I think this is like one of the last questions I have, specifically on your youth, because then I have questions on, late 80s when you become a Jesuit. But how did you ever feel like an outsider? Maybe did you ever feel like, oh, maybe why did you ever question your own faith? Did you ever question the radicalization of the young people? Were you ever in a conflict with someone because you were just so religious compared to a lot of the other young people your age? Because your safe space was your home. I'm assuming a lot of your elders at home, your family, agreed with how you were living your life as this young person. But how was your social life back then? Did people know that you were really religious?
I think, to be honest, Des, I was pretty sheltered as a child, and in suburbia, everyone around you looked and acted the same. It was a pretty closed environment versus this something I was longing for even as a kid, something maybe more urban, something more cosmopolitan, something larger than this kind of bubble space or this closed space where everyone around us was more or less the same. That especially included racially.
It was a very white,
Yes,
a very white neighborhood, and I'm assuming it was a well. How small is Camden? I don't think isn't you grew up
but
in? Uh-huh.
yeah, I use Camden as like the nearest city, but it was really Deptford Township. We even have a mall. Eventually, they
The
built this whole.
township, yeah, gives it
Yeah.
away. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I should have been more specific. It really was outside of Camden, even. So was this, there were still farms around us. There was a lot of open space. But then where the homes were, they were all kind of the same kind of homes. They all looked alike. There was a uniformity versus a diversity of style, of imagination, of place, which is eventually why I loved joining the Jesuits, because I would get sent to other parts of the world to experience new cultures, many times to Haiti, and I speak Creole, and opening my eyes to a Black context was racially different context was awesome. But I didn't have that as a child. That would come later.
Right. Interesting. You wanted to challenge what you grew up with, your norms, your ideas. Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you so much. And then that brings me to you graduated in 1984, and in 1989 you entered the Jesuits, and then we have the tragedy of the four Jesuits and two women, you said, who traveled to
It,
Salvador and
it
were
was,
murdered. Yeah,
there were 6 Jesuit priests at the
six Jesuits.
University of Central America in El Salvador, and 2 women that were working there in the community, the Jesuit community,
Yes.
and they were all assassinated because several of the Jesuits were very activists in that moment, and were really challenging the government and really trying to care for the suffering people.
Of course.
And of course, there was a very tragic, violent outcome of their good work, their work for justice, their work for equity. But I'll tell you, that really, in my very first year in the Jesuits, suddenly I'm like, wow, this is really cool to be part of a group where something like this could happen, which means that they really were living what they preached. They were living caring for others. They were living this gospel,
right?
But in a radical sort of way. And so I don't know. I found it so inspiring, and it would lead me first to study Spanish in the Dominican Republic, and then in Mexico. But I would later have a chance to go on mission to Haiti. And that really changed my whole imagination, to be in a country that was so racially different from my background, and surrounded by Black people, and suddenly realizing what it feels to be the minority, to be different. I stood out, but I wasn't victimized. I wasn't abused. I wasn't, called names. I was cared for. I was respected. They helped me to try to learn the language. It was very hard language for me, but it was so different from what I had read as a history major of how Black women and men were treated in our country and still today. The inequity, the abuse, the discrimination. So it became this kind of conversion moment, I guess, for me, of seeing things differently, and experiencing life in a very different context.
And is that when you decided that you were definitely going to incorporate social justice as part of your work for the rest of your life, really? As long as you were Jesuit, you would always be committed to that. Isn't it an integral part of Jesuit life to be involved in issues of the community, to advocate, right, and empower others?
Yes, absolutely, Des. And I've been really blessed to do that, not only in other countries. I worked for about 9 years in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. We used to have a church there, very multicultural. We had West Indian, Caribbean, and Latino people from all countries. And we were right next to a very Hasidic Jewish neighborhood. So being in this kind of like whirlwind space, by the time I got there in the 90s, I just found it exciting. It was exhilarating. This is where I should be, trying to figure out life and be with people, great people, but suffering from injustices and struggles.
And you would only experience that in an urban area. So you were right where you needed to be.
Yeah.
So that
it was that. It was that early desire, Des. As a boy, I didn't realize what that would mean. Oh, I want to be in a city. I want to be like urban. But what it came to mean is you're with the people that they have so much to teach me, and they still teach me and challenge me around justice and advocacy and working to make changes so that there's greater equity in society and for people, especially people of color and transgender. I mean, you name it. However, our society brands people and judges them. They're the very people, we need to be with, we need to learn from, and we need to advocate with and for.
Exactly. And you did that in a way that was, it was a reciprocal relationship. You took from the community and you gave back, which not a lot of folks do, especially when they're trying to absorb as much as they can from those in the community. They just take and leave. But you did, invest your time there, so much so that you learned Creole, in Haiti. Um, so, and I'm assuming that, I mean, did you learn, you can speak on your experiences in Haiti as well. Um, did you learn a lot of this when you were actually studying, or is a lot of this is on the go? Were you, I guess, nervous of embarking on such a career path, as a life path, or did you think you were ready because of what you learned at your university?
I think it began at the university, but it certainly really broke open, like a spring flower popping open, and so much beauty and possibility when I entered the Jesuits. And I think the way my studies went as a Jesuit, from philosophy, then later theology, I was always allowed to integrate, like
Mhm.
almost like a work practicum or pastoral practicum, like weaving in, going to one summer going to Mexico, other summers going to Haiti, several summers, and then spending 6 months in Haiti, that it would become woven into my studies program. So, like, study abroad, as so many of
Mhm.
our students would do. I was able to do that and make it kind of connect with and be in dialogue with my studies, my formal studies, that being with the people in Haiti, living in different, very small villages with them, and only being exposed to Creole, not even French, because
Right.
sometimes in the capital they're speaking French. I didn't want to learn French. I wanted to learn the language of the people,
Right.
all Haitian people. Um, and I knew that would help me to minister better to the Haitians in diaspora,
Mhm.
those here in Brooklyn. So it was, but
Mhm.
it's a great
Right.
question. Like, how do you, is, does that, all that sit over here and then you're doing your studies over there? I really was given the opportunity to connect the two um, as I journeyed through my formation.
Right. And you did, um, that decade, you were teaching most of the time, right? I think.
Not really.
Mhm.
I was doing in the 90s. Well, I was working with young people in Brooklyn for a period. Like, we had youth group and after school programs, but I was getting other people to help tutor. I was kind of like the director of this outreach program.
Mhm.
Um, but it really was trying to engage young people outside of school, but in meaningful ways. So the after school activities, we had retreats for them. We would go visit different colleges just to kind of plant those seeds about a future, like maybe,
Right.
right?
And because you were in Brooklyn, you were in general in the city, um, was a part of that to keep kids off the streets.
Yeah,
Right.
in the 90s, I was there during the Crown Heights riots. We had a lot of tension between our Caribbean community and our Hasidic community. And yeah, and our young people could often be, and still are, in the middle of a crossfire when
Right.
violence breaks out. And so, as best as we could, not only keeping them off the street, but finding really meaningful inspiring, life-changing opportunities for them that could help them imagine their future in the midst of some craziness that was going on.
And you were also maybe providing a safe space for your Caribbean youth, which I'm assuming were mostly Black youth, young Black youth, from possible attacks maybe by some of the Jewish individuals right in the community. They knew where to go, right? After school, they knew that they could
Yes.
find some safety, right, under your wing, right, in the church.
Yes.
Which is amazing. And I'm glad that, those kids were able to find something to hold on to, because race riots, that they were at a peak in the 90s, right? Conversations around police brutality. Before we get into, and if you want, you can, but last question before you can go off on Haiti and, your experiences there, your 9 years there. As that was happening around you, and clearly young people, we will be vocal about what is happening in our schools, what is happening in our communities, in our neighborhoods. What were some of the things that, besides offering a physical space and giving them a word or two, do you remember a specific thing that that you did during that time, a specific a quote or a word that you remember all those years ago, maybe a memory from that time of how you were able, through the church, to help out these kids? In like in regards to race, like how did you kind of manage that? How did you provide warmth to them?
Well, there was, it's not like a phrase, it was just sharing, in particular, this one young Black person's story where he was just standing in a bodega in the neighborhood and someone just pulls out a gun, and he had done nothing. He was shot and is rushed to Kings County Hospital, and it was really close, like, he almost died. So his mother and some of his friends came, got me. I went right to the hospital, and we they said, "Father, we just have to, we have to pray." And it was almost like we held a vigil in the waiting room. He was undergoing surgery. The bullet came very close to his heart, and just to be with these young people, his mother, in that moment, and that they really, they were leading the prayer, because I was it's beyond, because I knew this young guy really well, and I just was really upset. But his friends, and his mother, the
That's
love,
beautiful. Yeah.
the love that I felt in that space, and their faith, and they just kept saying to one another, he's gonna come through this, But I was like amazed at how they were leading the vigil. They were in prayer, and I wasn't the leader of that. They were, but I felt peace and I felt hope.
Right. And I
Thanks.
think, well, I think they valued also your presence. Um, I am Latina, and I've had, fortunately, in my life, I've had a couple of loved ones who um, were in the hospital, and they would call up their local priest from their church, and just having them be there, as you said, even if they're not physically, you know, um, providing a word or a vigil like situation, just having someone like you be there is powerful. So don't downplay your significance in that moment, for sure. Okay, but that was very powerful. And I'm glad you were there for him. I'm sure you made a great impact in a lot of those youth's lives. And now I'm going to transition into. Or did you want to say anything on your experience in Haiti in particular?
You know, sometimes a priest can be asked a question like, Des, well, why did you decide to be a priest, or why did you decide to stay a priest after all these scandals and
Mhm.
terrible stories about priests? And I always give the same answer. It's like, the people of Haiti called me to my priesthood. Their faith has always made my faith feel like that mustard seed that Jesus talks about in the parables. It's like, okay, even if you have faith like that tiny, I can work with it. Just let me in.
Mhm.
Their faith was so large in the midst of such poverty, such suffering. I had never been to such a poor country, poor in this economic sense, but so rich spiritually. Um, People that just they're so believing and trusting and welcoming. What little they have, they would always share with me, and I was humbled and kept looking at myself, saying, boy, I got a lot to work on.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so that's
So,
always my takeaway from that, the people of Haiti, that those journeys to Haiti, the learning the language, being in the culture, just convinced me that I want to live this life and do what good I can do, and to promote justice and equity because of all those memories and all those blessings that I
mhm.
received.
So that was the turning point. Entering the priesthood wasn't something that you had decided on early on. This was the moment where you said, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
This is what I want to experience.
I think at first it seemed, yeah, I guess I'm going to do this, but let's see.
Mhm.
But it just became real. And the real yes, I said a real yes to this life and forever. Like, I'm in this till the end. And I credit Haiti. It's like,
Interesting. And how after that was in the 90s, correct? Um, Really quickly, how did you feel after the 2010 earthquake that hit Haiti? How did you respond to that? What emotions did you feel at that moment?
well, it was strange. I was going out to, I want to say, somewhere like Mendham, New Jersey. I was going to give a talk to a young adult group. Um, and and I'm listening to the radio, and I hear the news, and in that moment I just had to pull over, and I just cried
Right.
because I they were describing how the presidential house, like the dome was down and the cathedral collapsed. They were naming what they were seeing in the moment of the devastation. And I knew all these places. I had visited those places, and I could just imagine, not only these buildings down, but so many people dead. Um, and it was beyond anything I could comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I felt great sadness. And, and this is before, we could do FaceTime and, Zoom. And
Mm-hmm.
it was very challenging even before the earthquake to communicate. There were cell phones, but the towers and connection so the other challenge or sadness was like it was really hard to communicate with people that I remembered and knew. Later, I was able to, but not everyone. And I wonder, did they die?
Right.
So many died. But back here, my Brooklyn Haitian American connection, we really got involved in gathering supplies and
Oh, how
getting
wonderful. Yeah.
things. And it was all young people. They led the charge, Des. And once again, I was there, like you said, probably just my presence and bless the container before it went on the boat.
Yeah.
But it really was just inspiring to see these young people determined to help their country and care. Huge outpouring. Now, the sad thing is, and maybe we knew it in the moment, but we wanted to believe that the corrupt politicians of Haiti would do the right thing after an earthquake. A lot of supplies would just sit at the ports. Unless people were paid off, they wouldn't move the materials and the goods. And it's a country with a historical challenge of corruption and ineffectual government.
Mhm.
But who are we to judge? We're not. We don't always get a
Right.
gold medal.
Right.
So,
No, of
but the
course, but
hearts of
mhm.
those young Haitian Americans, and still their hearts are really wonderful and very loving, very caring.
That's interesting. I'm assuming you physically couldn't, you haven't been back in a while.
No, no, my first year at St. Peter's University was 2010, 2011.
Mhm.
And just as I was arriving, my mom and dad, still in South Jersey, my dad was diagnosed with dementia, and it got bad really fast. So I first moved my dad to Jersey City to St. Anne's nursing home, which is down in Greenville. And then I moved mom. She was able to be in a senior apartment for a few years. Then my dad died. And my mom is at Peace Care St. Joseph. I can walk there from here. And she's going to be 92. But COVID took a lot out of her. She had COVID,
Yeah.
but this whole period, this whole moment, because I couldn't physically visit, we could do Zoom, like a Zoom call or FaceTime. But I mean, for a 90-some-year-old person, it's
It's
very
not the
hard.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she's tired. She's very tired right now. Yeah. So,
Yeah. I'm sorry about
but
that. I'm sorry about your father.
yeah, I got so involved in trying to be there for them as well.
Mhm.
Been at the university, been with great young adults, and you're all inspiring. Uh, but I didn't feel free to go back to Haiti to do some missionary work or service. I just feel like I got to stay closer to home,
Of course.
to monitor their care.
Of course. But you still did some work here with
Yes,
Haitian immigrants, Haitian
yes,
Americans, and that's that's just as great. Clearly the circumstances were not in your favor, but in that like Jesuit tradition, right? You still were involved in the community. You didn't turn a blind eye to what was happening and how to the bigger issues and how it was affecting the very people that um as Jesuits should be advocating for, so the poor and um Yeah, that's great. That's absolutely wonderful. And I think we are now in, more into modern day. You're 10 years so far here at St. Peter's. Um, what were your first years like?
So, Des, when I arrived, I was chaplain in campus ministry. So the first 2 years, and then the director of campus ministry at the time, Mary Sue, she moved on to Marquette to be
Mhm.
director. And so then, some of my friends at the university said, "Oh, you should go for that job." And I'm like, well, I don't really know if I want it. I like being chaplain. I have a lot of freedom. But I interviewed for the job and I became the director of campus ministry, which I held for 4 years. And so now that takes me up to 6 years at St. Peter's. And then the vice president for mission and ministry at the time retired, Father Braden. And so the president, Dr. Kanakia, really encouraged me to consider taking the vice president position to be on his cabinet as the Jesuit presence. And I couldn't
Yeah,
say no to Dr. Kunak.
of course.
He's just great. And he's been an amazing leader. And I respect him greatly. So I said yes. And I did that job for 4 years into COVID. And then I transitioned during COVID from vice president to the administrator here at St. Aedan's at the church, while Father Andy, who was in campus ministry and teaching, he's become the vice president. So I feel that there's still a Jesuit there, a great
Yeah.
guy, much younger than me,
Mhm.
and I'm here. But whenever a student
Oh,
calls, um,
I'm so sorry. There's an 11-year-old in my house.
that is okay. That's a
11-year-old
good thing.
sister. I'm so sorry, Father.
That's good.
Um,
That's okay, Des.
oh my God. How embarrassing. Wait, they're gonna cut this, thank God. I'm so
They'll
sorry
take
about
care of
that.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Listen, they can do anything today.
I mean,
Is
you're
that
right. Kids are supposed to be a blessing, joy. Father Rocco. She keeps me on my toes, that's for sure.
they usually do?
Yeah. We're all old here. I'm 22. The middle child is 18. My mom is a single mom. She's 53. She's 11. So, she will always be annoying. Always, just because of how young she is. But anyway, enough of
That's her
that.
mission. Talk about a mission.
Yes. That'll be her, just because of the age difference. It will always be her. But I'm sorry about that tangent. I'm curious about some of your most memorable moments here, to the events you were able to attend because you were so busy, as the sort of representative, well, at least how I understood you to be a representative of all the Jesuits on campus. What were some of your favorite moments, teachable moments, maybe even perhaps?
I think one of the most inspiring moments for me was during Superstorm Sandy. And to see the students that couldn't get home, and how
But we
uh,
can, if we want, we can wrap up after this question. I don't want to take more of your
no,
time.
no, but what I want to share is, so Superstorm Sandy came, the power went out on the campus.
Mhm.
Many of the Jesuit priests relocated to like Philadelphia, where because it was really hard to stay in the Jesuit community and also to stay on the campus The dorms had no lights, but I decided to stay because I was in campus ministry, and there was a core group. We had at least 100 and so students that there was no way we could get them off campus. They couldn't leave. They might have been international students. Every day, we all would get together, Sodexo, through Fordham University's food service. They provided, breakfast. It usually was cold or something, and cereal. We had some sort of lunch, sandwiches. We had dinner. I opened the chapel. We would have prayer just together, and people were sitting on the floor, and it wasn't always mass. It could just be spontaneous prayer because we're not all Catholic. But I just couldn't believe the sense of solidarity. We were dealing with a real challenge, and we couldn't fix it, but we could stay close and make sure we're okay together and caring for each other and reflecting. I was so inspired. Our students, you're just great, and we got through it. And we were actually in the chapel the day the lights started the light switches had been on, and suddenly the lights are flickering in the chapel, and the lights went on, and we were in the middle of a prayer. I mean, it was just amazing.
Did you know it was the storm? Were there hurricane warnings? I forgot. I was like 12 when this happened. I forgot.
But you know what they said, Des? I thought it was going to hit my parents. My parents were still in South Jersey, and I was getting ready to move them.
Right.
And the storm was supposed to hit more South Jersey. But suddenly it hit Jersey City, slammed us. All the power went out throughout the city, floods downtown. We didn't have flooding. We just had no power. And
oh, thank God.
And meanwhile, my mom is telling me, "Oh, it's not really that bad here." We were like,
It's not good. Jersey City is very close to sea level. We're right on the water. Infrastructure is not built to, handle such a storm. So, wow, I can't imagine St. Peter's just coming together like that. I think I think maybe because of COVID and just, being away from people, being away from community physically, something that I'm craving. I think a lot of people are craving a hug, right, from a friend. But that moment of solidarity, how you all organize together to at least, let's try to make this. Oh, am I cutting off? Am I cutting off?
A little, but not too bad. Not too bad.
Okay. But just, I
can hear you.
Oh, okay. Just how beautiful it was to have been there when you all organized this space, because it must have been very miserable, but you all thought, let's just try to make the best of what we got. And prayer does, I think that was a very nice addition. It goes with, what the values of St. Peter's, but also as a safe space for like non-Christians. There's a very significant Muslim community on campus, which I'm sure also took that time to pray. So just one of my one of my last questions. One of my last questions is, do you have more time? I don't also want to keep you.
I have a little more time. I'm good.
Okay, so maybe like 10 minutes or so.
Sure.
Okay. So you've had a very wonderful time here at St. Peter's. How do you, what are some of the things that you have done to accommodate Muslim students? I think they're very vocal about, they're perfectly fine with being in a Jesuit institution. They know what they're signing up for. But what are you doing to ensure that everyone is able to practice their religion on campus, whether they're Christian or not? What are some of the things that, have you noticed this? Have you known about this? And is there anything that you've done personally to ensure that people can, practice their faith?
So back in the day, actually, before campus ministry was in the student center and before the student center, the old campus ministry space was over in, I want to say over by McIntyre, the lounge, that area where the School of Education now is, the School of Business. And we worked, and I was part of this with the Muslim Student Association. We worked to find a space in that building where they could have a prayer room, a prayer space dedicated just for our Muslim students. And I helped to bring an imam from Georgetown University to dedicate that space with our Muslim students. It is really, really a cool moment of acknowledgement, of celebration, of dedication, and also allowing our Muslim students to have an appropriate space for their worship and their prayer. Now, what happened was, as everything was changing in that, as they were creating the School of Education and the School of Business, the Student Center was finishing, and I was part of the conversations because they were going to eliminate the Muslim prayer room as part of this reimagination of the McIntyre, of that building. And I was part of a committee with our Muslim Student Association at the time, who eventually they invited me to be their faculty advisor, because we were working so much together to figure out where should there be a sacred space for our Muslim students. And that's how it ended up. I felt strongly that it should be right on the first floor, just like campus ministry. It should be visible. We should be showing new students where our Muslim students and students of other faith can pray without crosses in there and statues. It's very minimal. And our Muslim students designed it because I felt that was really, really important. They all should be welcome. All faiths should be welcome, but also given a space that is meaningful for them.
Of course. Because as I was a member of MSA for 2 years, I'm not Muslim. I was the only non-Muslim on the e-board. If you check out any pictures of the e-board, I'm the only non-hijabi. And it's interesting. Yeah, and they really appreciated that. I thought it was taking up space, really, but they really did appreciate my presence there. And it's interesting how our advisors are you, Father Rocco, Catholic, and then Dr. Suri, who is Jewish. And I think that really embodies, right, that really embodies what MSA is, also trying to do, is even though they're trying to empower themselves, right, through their identity as Muslims, they never forget about solidarity, and they're always thinking about the greater community. And that's wonderful how you were able to work with them to making that come true. And that's, absolutely wonderful. And so just one last question. What do you think that you can do now? I think we're going back. Oh, you tell me if I'm cutting out, because can you hear me at least?
Okay. Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So obviously COVID has given us a time to reflect on what community really means, and working for others, working with others, things like mutual aid, sending reminder texts, are you okay, right? We're really giving new definitions to what being in community really is. And I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you are going to do once we go back to campus, right? In the fall, what are some things that you're excited to do that might involve, bringing that spirit back to isolated individuals? What are the things that you're going to do to foster a community on campus once we go back? Do you have any ideas, any wishes? Maybe you can't do it, but maybe someone else can.
Something I'm already planning here in the church community is just starting fellowship after services. I'll help at the university as much as but I would think like Father Andy, Jennifer, Eric, Sekel. I'm thinking that the campus ministry team is going to be working with other departments. I think fellowship, finding any with food, just bring people together.
Yeah.
Now that we can be a little closer together, we need just to chill. It doesn't have to be, like a formal program, like, oh, we're going to talk about, we can do those open mics about how's it been. But I think just basic, especially in the fall when it's still nice out, we can be outside.
Mhm.
Let's just fellowship, have music, have food, let people just get reacquainted and reconnected. Like I said, I'm already planning that. I have some tents, and just put some tables, and however we can make that reconnection and community. You said it,
Mhm.
Des. We're starved for real face-to-face, hug, touch. Maybe we can even have a hugging tent, but just ways that we can just feel, so.
Mhm. No, that's great. I'm gonna be missing that because I'm graduating, but I'm sure my friends will let me know all about it, and I'm sure it'll be a success. Of course, through your work from the church, will be felt on campus 100%. I cannot see you well, so I'm just assuming that you can hear me at least. I'm just assuming, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can. We're both cutting out, I think.
Yeah, I turn my camera off because sometimes that just works better, but I think we're done for today, Father Rocco.
Well, thank you, Des.
Mhm.
Thank you.
This was really great.
I've enjoyed my time with you. Thank you. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Father Rocco.
Thank you, Des. Thank you.
All right, I will now end the call. Okay, I'm going to end the call.
Okay, I'll see you, Des.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.